So I've amassed quite the collection of Doctor Who magazines over the years, and I thought it might be interesting to have a look through some of them and pick out the highlights. Starting with this batch from the 1980s. Okay, so the oldest one I have is so old I don't even have the cover anymore. It's issue 91 from August 1984. The comic strip has the Sixth Doctor travelling with a penguin called Frobisher. Presumably they couldn't get the rights to use Bonnie Langford's likeness. There's an interview with Janet Fielding shortly after she's left the show. Even then she was very open about not having a good enough part. And she says these sort of things in this interview, which she would go on to say in the DVD extras and commentaries. But it's interesting to see that she had no problems finding acting work, at least in the year or two after she left the show. And there's a review of The Twin Dilemma, which tries to be diplomatic, but you can't help feeling the writer really hated it. Indeed, it ends by saying, the story is unlikely to be remembered as a classic or particularly good adventure, which is something of an understatement. Next is issue 122 from March 1987. Colin Baker had just announced he was leaving the show, but it wasn't considered important enough to feature until page 11. And interestingly enough, they did ask John Pertwee and Patrick Troughton if they wanted to come back to the show, and they said they would be interested. Imagine that, one of the old Doctors coming back to the show to play the part again. That would never happen nowadays. There's also a review of Terror of the Vervoids. Yeah, I haven't watched Trial of the Time Lords for a while, but I think that's a pretty fair judgment. 2 months later, issue 124, Sylvester McCoy takes over. And he's wearing a leather jacket and a scarf, in a sort of combination of the 4th and 9th Doctor's costume. The most notable article is the feature, Could There Be a Lady Doctor? I don't think anybody's ever referred to Jodie Whittaker's Doctor as a lady, which shows you how far we've come. The article's basically all about theoretical biology, how it could be scientifically possible for Time Lords to change gender. Which is kind of missing the point, really. Issue 130. Sylvester McCoy had fully taken over by this point. And there's his first interview in the role, which is pretty good, quite in depth. And the comic introduces the Doctor's new companion, a sexy space vampire called Ola, who would be in it for quite a few issues in this run. She's certainly an improvement over the Penguin. Next issue, 131, introduces Sophie Aldred. There's an interview with John Nathan Turner about season 24, which is very positive, as you might expect. There's also an interview with Bonnie Langford, which is equally positive. And at the end it introduces Sophie Aldred as Ace. There's a very nice photo of her in an off-the-shoulder top, which sadly she never wore in the series. Issue 132, bit of an out-of-focus photo on the cover. This one has a review of Time and the Rani. And again, it's pretty obvious that the writer absolutely hates it. But because they're writing for the official Doctor Who magazine, you have to try and be as positive as possible. But again, you can tell it's an absolute stinker. Issue 133, another out-of-focus cover. This has an article on Waiting for Doctor Who, which is written by Paul Cornell, who actually did end up writing for Doctor Who 17 years after he wrote this article, which shows if you keep on trying, you can achieve your dreams. And there's a review of Paradise Towers, which is even more critical than it was of Time and the Rani, which seems a bit unfair. I seem to remember Paradise Towers being a bit of a step up. But I haven't seen it for a while, so who knows. Then we come to issue 134, which has the news that there's going to be a Doctor Who movie starring John Cleese and Caroline Munro, which seems to be just an excuse to print a picture of Caroline Munro, not John Cleese for some reason. There's a big interview with Peter Davison, talking about everything from All Creatures Great and Small to Doctor Who, and complained about the writing and the lack of comedy, which is hard to argue with. The review this time is Delta and the Bannermen, which complains about it being too lightweight, but I think I enjoyed it well enough at the time. Issue 135 has a review of Dragonfire, and for once, the writer enjoyed it. I'm pretty sure it was my favourite at the time as well. And the comic strip has a crossover with Death's Head, who was in a lot of Marvel UK comics at the time. Issue 137 has the results of the season survey. Dragonfire came top and Time of the Rani came bottom, which is pretty much how it went in the latest survey as well. Though personally I would have put Paradise Towers higher, but I would have to rewatch the season to be sure. And there's also an interview with Pip and Jane Baker, where they address a lot of the criticisms that have been levelled at them over the years, which is quite an interesting read. They've never been my favourite writers of the show, but it is good to get their perspective on their own work. Skipping ahead to April 1989 for issue 147. This has an interview with Ben Aronovich, who went on to be a best-selling writer in his own right, and Ian Briggs, who didn't. The comic strip features the Sleaze brothers, who Marvel UK wanted to be as big as Death's Head, but on this basis you can see why they never took off. And there's a very positive review of The Greatest Show in the Galaxy. Issue 154 for November 1989 was the 10th anniversary issue. The main draw here is a big interview with Sylvester McCoy and Sophie Aldred, possibly the last one while they still had the roles, and they say both actors plan to stay on for season 27, if there is one. Of course there wasn't. Finally we have issue 156, which lets you vote in the season poll. Let's see what happened at the time. I said Survival first and Ghostlight bottom. I think I came to appreciate Ghostlight a lot more when it came out on DVD, and you could actually rewind it and try and figure out exactly what was going on. In the news section it says Doctor Who has a secure future. The BBC head of drama says Doctor Who has lasted 26 years and I can see no reason why it shouldn't continue. This must have been shortly before it was cancelled. And there's a comic strip written by Paul Cornell, who finally gets to wait for the show, just not in live action. Well, I hope that was interesting for some people. I also have another pile of magazines from the 1990s, so I may look at them in a future video. If you want to see more of this sort of thing, then please like this video or subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next time.